Besirkitabevi, İngilizce seslendirilmiş hikayeler serisi.
The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. Chapter 1. The Adventure Begins. Tom! No answer. Tom! Again no answer. Where's that boy? Aunt Polly said to herself. She wore her glasses and started to look around. Suddenly, the cat which was under the bed jumped and ran out. This stopped the old lady. Then she heard a noise behind her and she saw Tom on her back. He was standing near the cupboard. What have you been doing there? Nothing. Look at your hands and your mouth. What is that, Tom? Asked Aunt Polly angrily. Nothing. You've stolen something. I know what it is. It's jam. Give me that stick. The stick flew in the air. Tom was desperate. Look behind you, Aunt. There's something behind you. The old lady turned around, but there was nothing. She was afraid, but soon she understood that Tom had escaped. The old lady felt angry at first, but then she started to laugh. Tom is too smart for me. I can't understand his tricks, she said to herself. But I don't like punishing him. He's my poor dead sister's boy. But sometimes I have to punish him. I'll make him do some work tomorrow. This will be his punishment. After his mother's death, Tom had started to live with his old aunt in St. Petersburg, Missouri. Tom also had a brother, but he was a silent boy. His name was Sidney. Sidney did not like adventures. All the people thought he was a good boy. Tom reached home late that night. He helped Jim, the servant boy. They cut the wood together. Tom told him his adventures, and finally the wood was ready for the fire. During dinner, Aunt Polly asked Tom questions about his days at school. She thought he didn't go to school that day. "It's warm in the school, isn't it?" said Aunt Polly. "Yes, it is." "Didn't you want to go swimming, Tom?" Tom was scared for a while. He looked at Aunt Polly's face, but it told him nothing about this weird question. So he replied, "No, I didn't want very much." The old lady felt Tom's shirt and said, "I thought you went for a swim." She said, "But you're a good boy." The old lady often sewed the collar of Tom's shirt together. Then he could not open it. He couldn't take the shirt off to swim. But this time his shirt was dry, so she didn't feel angry. But suddenly Sidney said, "You sewed this collar with the white cotton, but now it's black, Auntie." Before his aunt could punish him, Tom ran out of the door shouting to his brother, "I'll fight you for that, Sid!" This time his aunt was really angry with him. Tom hid in a safe place and looked at 2 lange needles in his jacket. One of them carried white thread and the other black. He said, "Sometimes she sews it with black and sometimes with white. She'd never understood if Sid—" Tom was not the model boy of the village. He didn't like the well-behaved and model boys. But he had heard about the most well-behaved boy of the town, and he hated him. Within a few minutes he had forgotten his troubles because he had a new and a powerful interest. He was trying to whistle in a professional way. A Negro had taught him how to whistle like a bird. This new interest of his followed him wherever he went. That morning Tom was running down the street whistling, and suddenly he saw a strange boy on the street. His clothes were good and new. He was wearing shoes. Tom himself only wore shoes on Sunday, but it was not Sunday. Tom didn't like this new boy. He realized that he was that model boy of the town. They didn't speak for a while. If one moved, the other moved. They kept face to face and eye to eye. Finally, Tom broke the silence. "I can beat you, you know," cried Tom. "If you want, try it," he replied. "Well, I can do it." "No, you can't." "Yes, I can." "No, you can't." "I can." "You can't." "I can." "You can't." After a little pause, Tom said, "What's your name?" "I won't tell it to you," he cried. "This is none of your business." "Well, I'll make it my business." "Well, why don't you?" "If you say much, I will. Try then." "Oh, you think you're very smart, but I can knock you down," said Tom. "Try it," said the strange boy, and soon they began pushing. They were rolling and tumbling in the dirt, fighting like cats. After a while, they were both exhausted. At last, Tom shouted to the boy, "Don't come here again! I don't want to see you in this neighborhood!" He picked up a stone and threw it to Tom. Then he hit him between the shoulders and ran like an antelope. The new boy went to his home, brushing the dust from his clothes. But Tom didn't go back home. He followed the boy and saw where he lived. He was waiting for his enemy to come outside, but the enemy only made faces at him through the window. After a while, the enemy's mother appeared at the door and shouted at Tom angrily. She said, "Hey, Tom, you're a bad, vulgar child. Don't come here again." When he reached home, it was pretty late. So Tom climbed in at the window, but Aunt Polly was waiting for him. She looked at his dirty clothes and she said, "I'll punish you. Tomorrow you'll work for me." She was very angry with him. On Saturday morning, Tom had to brush the fence outside the house. Although he wanted to go to Cardiff Hill, he had a brush in one hand and a bucket in the other. The flowers and the trees were very beautiful, and the weather was fresh that morning. Cardiff Hill, beyond the village, was green with vegetation, and it was inviting. But that day life was sad for Tom. He thought it was impossible to finish it in one day, so he had to think of a way to make his work easier. He looked up and saw Jim. He was carrying a bucket to get some water from the water pump. "Jim," Tom called, "I'll carry the water if you whitewash the fences." Jim shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Tom. Your aunt said I mustn't paint the fence, so I can't." "Oh, never mind what she said, Jim. She always says things like that. She will never know. Please, Tom, don't insist. She always talks awful, you know, but talk doesn't hurt. If you brush the fences, I'll give you a white marble." "A white marble? Are you sure, Tom?" "Of course, Jim. It will be yours if you let me—" "Okay, Tom, I can't refuse this offer. Give me that marble." Tom put the bucket on the ground to give the marble to Jim. But as soon as he knelt down, Jim took the marble and he ran to the water pump with his bucket of water. So Tom went on painting the fences into white. He began to think of the fun he had planned for this day. "And I have to find a solution," he said to himself. After a while, he noticed Ben Rogers. He was running and jumping with an apple in his hand. He was making voices like a ship and also giving orders as a captain of the ship. Suddenly he cried, "Oh, Tom, you're in trouble, my boy. You're working." Tom went on painting the fence. He didn't say anything to Ben. His mouth watered for the apple, but he stuck to his work. Then he stood back like an artist, and he looked at the white color of the fence. "Tom!" Ben shouted again. "Oh, it's you, Ben," Tom said finally. "I didn't notice you." "I'm going for a swim. Would you like to join me? But I see that you have some hard work to do." Tom looked carefully at the boy and said, "Does it seem like work to you?" "Isn't it work, Tom? Don't say that you like it." Tom answered carelessly, "You can call it work, but it's not important for me as work. I like to paint it." Ben was astonished. He shouted, "What? Do you like painting fences? It's unbelievable." Tom, putting fake enthusiasm into his work, answered, "Does a boy get to paint a fence every day? So I'm lucky. I think you have never painted fences in your life before." Ben stopped eating his apple and he said, "No." Then he watched Tom painting the fences. He was getting more and more interested. Finally he said, "Tom, let me whitewash a little." Tom almost agreed, but then he said, "No, Ben, my aunt doesn't want anyone else to paint the fences. I must do it by myself. It must be beautiful when I've finished." Ben started to beg. "Oh, Tom, I promise I won't make a mistake. I'll give my apple to you if you let me paint a little, please." "Ben, I'd like to, but it's really important. Jim also wanted to paint it, but Aunt Polly wouldn't let him. Sid wanted to do it, and she wouldn't let Sid. But now you're insisting on it," said Tom. "Oh, Tom, I promise that I'll paint it carefully, without a mistake. Please, Tom." "No, Ben, I'm afraid. I'll give you all of it." Tom's face was sad, but he didn't show the happiness in his heart. Finally, he gave the brush to Ben. He sat on the ground and ate the apple. He watched Ben paint the fence, but he also thought that he needed the other boys for the job. After a while, other boys came along, and one by one they all painted the fence. Of course, they had to pay Tom for this great occasion. Tom gave this chance to Bill Fisher for a kite, to Johnny Miller for a dead rat, and so on and so on. At the end of the day, Tom was nearly rich. He had 12 marbles, a piece of blue bottle glass to look through, a key that wouldn't unlock anything, a dog collar, but no dog, a brass doorknob, the handle of a knife, and 4 pieces of orange peel. Moreover, had a good time and plenty of friends. The painting of the fence was also finished. The boys had painted the fence 3 times. Tom discovered a great law of human action. He thought that the work consisted of whatever a person is obliged to do, and play consisted of whatever a person is not obliged to do. Driving a carriage for yourself is a joy, but driving a carriage for someone else is work. He thought he would surprise Auntie. He had finished the painting of the fences only in 1 day, but his auntie wouldn't know the trick of it. Tom was proud of himself. The work was well done, and he had a great treasure, so he couldn't help smiling while going home. Chapter 2. Tom Falls in Love. When Tom entered the house, his aunt was sitting by the window. She thought that Tom had already left the painting and joined the other boys. But when he said, "I've finished painting the fence, Auntie," she was really surprised. She got out of the house to check the fences. She saw that Tom's words were true. She was so astonished that she couldn't speak for a few minutes. She was also proud of Tom. Aunt Polly gave him a big red apple as a present. Then he asked, "May I go out and play, Auntie?" She gave permission to Tom, and she felt happy. Tom went to the village where 2 armies of boys had met to fight. Tom was leading a team, and his friend Joe Harper another. Joe was Tom's best friend. The 2 commanders did not fight each other. They climbed on a wall and gave orders to their soldiers. Soon the fight began. Tom's army won the battle. Then the boys decided on the date of the next battle. On his way home, Tom was passing by the house of Jeff Thatcher, and suddenly he noticed a lovely little blue-eyed girl with yellow hair in the garden. He instantly fell in love and forgot Amy Lawrence, the girl that he had been in love with the week before. He had deep feelings in his heart for Amy until he saw this blue-eyed girl. Tom watched the beautiful girl secretly for a while, and finally she saw him. He pretended that he did not see her, and he did various gymnastic tricks in front of her house. But she did not watch him and went towards the house. Tom was very sad, but soon he was surprised and felt glad, because she threw a flower over the fence. He put the flower inside his coat. He placed it near his heart. He waited near the fence for long hours, but the girl did not come out again. So Tom went back home thinking about this mysterious girl. When he returned home, Aunt Polly was waiting to whip him. She accused him of stealing sugar. Then Sid tried to reach the sugar bowl behind Aunt Polly's back, but he dropped the bowl onto the floor. When Aunt Polly returned, she immediately began to beat Tom. But Tom cried out, "Hold on, Auntie, why are you beating me? It was Sid who broke the sugar bowl." Aunt Polly paused and did not say a word for a while. Then she said, "Sid is a good boy. If I don't keep my eyes on you, you won't leave any sweets at home." Tom was sorry for himself. He imagined his own funeral. "Aunt would cry for me," he said to himself. He imagined that his aunt was bending over him and crying. "Would that lovely girl cry over me too?" he asked himself. After this imagination, Tom felt sad and began to cry secretly. That morning, his cousin Mary was running and dancing happily in the house. Tom could not stand her childish behavior, so he got out of the house and went directly to Judge Thatcher's house. He climbed over the fence and walked through the Thatcher's garden. He got his flower and looked at it hopelessly. "Is she a kind girl or a cruel girl?" he asked himself. He hoped to see the beautiful little girl. He held his precious flower in his hand and lay on the ground. He wanted her to see him with the flower in his hand. But soon he heard a voice shouting, and a servant threw a bucket of water out the window. A lot of water came down on the fearless boy. He jumped as quickly as a cat from the garden. He walked back home thinking of his bad chance and of his great love. Chapter 3. Tom Tells a Big Lie. On Monday morning, Tom was unhappy. He found himself in bed, and he did not want to go to school. So he attempted to avoid school, playing sick, groaning enough to wake Sid, who was sleeping by his side. "Tom! Say Tom!" No response. "Tom! What's the matter, Tom?" Sid shook him and looked in his face anxiously. "Oh, don't, Sid, don't shake me." "Why, what's the matter, Tom? I must call Auntie. How long have you been like this?" "No, don't call Auntie. I've been like this for hours and hours, Brother Sid. I forgive you for everything. I forgive you for breaking that bowl, Sid. When I'm dead—" "Oh, Tom, you're not dying, are you? Don't, Tom. Oh, don't." "I forgive everybody, Sid. Tell them so, Sid. And give my one-eyed cat to that new girl that has come to town, and tell her—" He took his clothes and ran up the stairs to Auntie's room. He cried out, "Auntie, Tom's dying." "Dying?" she said. "Yes, Auntie, he's dying. Come quickly." "I don't believe it," she said, but the old lady ran up the stairs. Sid and Mary followed her. Her lips were trembling and her face was white. Then she reached Tom's room and she asked kindly, "You, Tom, what's the matter with you?" "Oh, Auntie, I'm dying. I've got inflammation on my toe. I'm being poisoned." The old lady sat down on a chair and laughed. Then she said, "That's nonsense. Get out of bed." The groaning stopped and the pain disappeared from his toe. But Tom continued his words. "Oh, Auntie, it really hurts, and I forgot my tooth." "What's the matter with your tooth, Tom?" "One of them is loose. It hurts badly." "Open your mouth and let me see." "Yes, you're right. The tooth is loose, but you won't die of it. Mary, bring me a long piece of silk and some coal from the fire." "Oh, please, Auntie, don't pull it down," begged Tom. "It doesn't hurt any more. I don't want to stay home. I want to go to school." "Oh, you don't. All this trouble was about school. You'd stay at home, then go to the river to catch fish. I know you. I love you, Tom, but you always have some tricks to break my old heart." By this time, the dental instruments were ready. The old lady tied one end of the silk rope to Tom's tooth. She tied the other end of the rope to the part of the bed. Then she moved the hot coal towards Tom's face. He moved back so quickly with fear that his loose tooth came out easily. As he was on his way to school, he met several boys. Tom showed them the empty place in his mouth, and he looked happy again. Later, when he was walking alone, he met Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry was known as a lazy, bad, vulgar child, so all the mothers in town hated Huckleberry. Aunt Polly had told Tom not to play with this ill-mannered, cruel child, but Tom played with Huck every time he got a chance. Huck had never been to school. He did whatever he wanted. He had no home and slept on steps, but he liked that kind of life. He was always dressed in old and dirty clothes. They were large on him because he had to wear the clothes that were thrown away by the others. He never had to wash himself. He was never sent to bed. Nobody forbade him to fight and stay out at night. So every boy in St. Petersburg admired Huckleberry Finn and wanted to be like him. "Hey, Huckleberry," said Tom, "what's that you got in your hand?" "It's a dead cat, Tom." "Where did you find it?" "A boy gave it to me." "What's a dead cat good for, Huck?" "They are used for curing wounds." "It's senseless. There's a better medicine than this." "I don't believe you. What's that medicine? Tell me." "The water in the hollow of a tree, of course." "It's a big lie." "No, it isn't. Have you tried it?" "No, I haven't, but Bob Turner tried it." "How do you know that Bob tried it?" "Well, he told Jeff Thatcher, and Jeff told Johnny Baker, and Johnny told Jim Hollis, and Jim told Ben Rogers, and Ben told the nigger, and the nigger told me. That seems like a big lie. These boys are all liars except that nigger. Can you tell me how Bob Turner drank it? He put his hand in a rotten stump where the rainwater was. In the daytime? Yes, at least they told me so. I think it's better to go there at midnight and find that tree with the hollow. It's a brilliant idea, so let's go there tonight. Okay, let's meet after the whole town has slept. Chapter 4. Becky's Heart Breaks. When Tom reached the school, he couldn't run away from the master. The master heard him coming and he woke up. "Thomas Sawyer," the master called. "Come here and explain the reason for being late to school." Suddenly, Tom noticed some beautiful yellow hair hanging down a girl's back. There was an empty place near the girl. Tom replied to Mr. Dobbin's question bravely. "I stopped to talk to Huckleberry Finn." The master was surprised, and he looked at Tom in a strange way. "Repeat your answer, Tom." "I stopped to talk to Huckleberry Finn," Tom replied again clearly. "Thomas Sawyer, this is the bravest confession I've ever listened to. Now take off your jacket." The master whipped Tom hard with a stick. Tom didn't shout. He bore it in silence. When his arm was tired, Mr. Dobbins ordered him, "Now, sir, go and sit with the girls. This is a warning to you." Tom walked sadly to the girl's side, but in fact, his heart was beating fast. He was about to sit next to the beautiful yellow-haired girl. Everyone in the room laughed at him. When he sat down, the girl moved away a bit. She turned her head away for a while, but when she turned it back again, she saw an apple standing on the desk. She pushed it away 2 times, but at last she took it. Then she saw Tom drawing a picture, and she tried to see Tom's picture. "Let me see it," she said. Tom let her see the picture. It was a small caricature of a house. She looked for a moment, then whispered, "It's nice. Now draw a man." She was satisfied with the monster-looking man and whispered, "It's a beautiful man. Now draw me." He drew a fat girl with thin arms, but she was again satisfied. "You draw well, but I can't draw." This was a great chance for Tom, so he said, "I can teach you after school this morning. What's your name?" "Becky Thatcher, and I'll stay if you stay," the girl said. Then Tom began writing something on a piece of paper. She wanted to see it, but Tom was afraid that she would tell it to someone. Finally, he let her read it. It was written, "I love you," on the paper. "Oh, you bad thing," she said, but she was smiling happily. After school, Tom met Becky Thatcher again. They pretended that they were going home, but then they turned back to the school. They were alone and sat together. Tom gave Becky a pencil and guided her hand. After a little drawing, they started to talk. "Have you promised to marry anyone, Becky?" Tom asked. "No, but what is it like?" "You only tell a boy you won't love anybody else, only him, and then you kiss. That's all." "A kiss?" she said. "What do you kiss for?" "I don't know, but they always do that." "Do you remember the words on the paper?" "Yes, I remember." "What was it?" She resisted for a while, but then she wanted him to turn his head, so he turned his head. Becky bent timidly and whispered, "I love you." Then she sprang away and ran around and around the desks with Tom after her, and sat down in a corner at last. "Now, Becky, it's all over but the kiss. Don't be afraid of that," said Tom. She tried to run away again, but Tom caught her and gave her a kiss. "That's all, Becky. Now you mustn't love anyone except me. You must never talk with the other boys, and you must walk me to school." "That's so nice. I've never heard of it before." "Oh yes, that's nice," said Tom and continued, "Amy Lawrence and I." Tom opened his big eyes and realized his foolish words. "Oh, Tom, I am not the first girl you've been engaged to," cried Becky. "Oh, don't cry, Becky. I don't care for her any more." Tom tried to put his arm around her neck, but she pushed him away and turned her face to the wall. He took out a metal knob and offered it to her. This was his greatest treasure, but Becky threw it to the floor. Tom left it there and marched out of the building. Although Becky called, "Tom, please come back," there was no answer. so she began to cry again. But she had to be calm because the other children were coming back to school. The next day, Tom was on the way to school when he met Becky on the road. "I'm so sorry, Becky," he said. "I behaved very badly toward you." She looked directly to his face and said, "Mr. Thomas Sawyer, please go away." Becky had poured the ink bottle on Tom's book the day before, so she said to herself, "Mr. Dobbins will whip him for that." She smiled in a naughty way, but trouble was coming to Becky herself. Mr. Dobbins had a secret book, and the students didn't know its name. It was always locked up in the teacher's desk. But that day, Becky saw the key in the lock and she was alone. She took out the book and saw the name of it. It was called Modern Medicine. She began to read it, but suddenly she noticed a shadow of someone. It was Tom standing there. "Tom Sawyer, I know you'll tell Mr. Dobbins." She started to cry. "Oh, what shall I do? He has never punished me before, you know. I'm a good student, but this time he will." She closed the book, but she tore a page of the book. She got more anxious. She locked the book in the desk, and she ran away crying angrily. Tom did not understand Becky. He hadn't thought of telling Mr. Dobbins. "I'll not tell, but he is a clever man, and girls can't lie easily. He'll understand soon." The lesson started as Mr. Dobbins came in. All of them got out their books. The master saw the ink on the book. Although Tom said he had not done it, Mr. Dobbins did not believe him and whipped him badly. Becky watched this punishment and she felt sad, but she couldn't say anything. She thought, "Tom will tell I tore the master's secret book." After an hour, the master opened his desk and began to read his book. Becky's face was nearly white. Tom saw her face and he wanted to do something to her. He wanted to take the master's book and run away, but it was too late and Becky was in trouble. "Who tore this book?" shouted Mr. Dobbins angrily. The room was very silent. "Benjamin Rogers, did you tear it?" he asked. "No, sir." "Joseph Harper, did you tear this book?" "No, sir." Then the master turned to the girls. Their legs were trembling with fear. "Amy Lawrence, was it you?" "No, sir." "Becky Thatcher, did you tear this page?" He wanted Becky to look him in the face, but her voice trembled. Suddenly Tom cried, "I tore it, Mr. Dobbins. It was me who tore it." Tom saw that Becky was relaxed and was really happy. He had saved her from the master, but Mr. Dobbins whipped him badly. He also said, "You must stay at school for 2 more hours, Mr. Sawyer." "She'll wait for me," said Tom to himself. After those 2 boring extra hours, he saw Becky there. His heart filled with happiness and love. "Tom, you're unbelievable. You are also very noble," she said to her great love. Chapter 5. A Deadly Secret. Tom and Sid were in their beds at 9 o'clock that night. Sid slept in a few minutes, but Tom was waiting for Huck's meow as a sign. Finally, Huck arrived and gave the signal. Tom climbed out the window, off the roof, and ran off with Huck to the town graveyard. A cool wind was blowing among the graves. They were very near the place where Horace Williams had just been buried. Tom was frightened and he wanted to talk to Huck. "Hucky, do you believe the dead people like us to be here?" Tom asked. "I wish I knew," Huckleberry whispered. "Do you think that Horace Williams hears us talking?" "Of course he does. At least his spirit does." "Shh! There! Can you hear it?" "Oh, Tom, they're coming! What will we do?" After remaining in the same spot for a while, the boys had heard some voices from the other end of the graveyard. "Look at that light over there, Huck. What's that?" asked Tom. "They must be the spirits, and they can see in the dark, just like cats." "It can also be the candle of Satan, Tom," answered Huck. "Oh, don't be afraid. I don't believe they'll bother us. We don't give them any harm." Then they saw 3 shadows coming near them. Soon they found out that those shadows were someone from the village. They recognized the voices as the figures came closer and closer. "I hear the voice of Muff Potter," said Tom. "You're right, and the other is Red Joe. But what are they looking for?" said Huck. Old Muff Potter was the town drunk, and he was also known as a strange man. The boys were silent, and they started to watch the men. There was also a third man. He was young Dr. Robinson. The doctor was giving orders to the others, and they were taking out a coffin out of the grave. The doctor was sitting and watching Potter and Joe as they were digging out the grave. Finally, Red Joe said, "It's done, doctor. Now you have to give us $5 more. If you don't, we won't carry the dead body." "What does this mean?" said the doctor. "I've already paid you what you wanted." "Yes, you've done more than that," Red Joe replied. 5 years ago, I came to your father's kitchen, and I only wanted some food, not any money. You sent me away. But then your father said I was a thief and sent me to prison. I've got red Indian blood in me, and I've never forgotten that." The doctor was astonished. He hit Red Joe on his face, and Red Joe fell down. Then suddenly, Potter picked up his knife and shouted, "Don't hit my friend! Stop it!" Potter's knife was on the ground. Potter and the doctor were fighting, and the doctor picked up a board from William's grave and hit Potter with it. Potter fell to the ground unconsciously. Seeing his chance, Red Joe took the knife and pushed it into the doctor's chest. The doctor fell dead. When Tom and Huck saw Red Joe kill the doctor, they ran away with fear. Red Joe robbed the doctor's body and then put the bloody knife into Potter's hand. 3, 4, 5 minutes passed, and then Potter began to moan. His hand closed upon the knife, and he raised it. His eyes met Joe's. "What's happened, Joe?" he asked. Joe, without moving, said, "It's a dirty business. What did you do it for?" "I didn't do it." "Don't deny it, Potter. It won't change the truth. The truth is that you've killed him," shouted Red Joe. Potter trembled, and his face turned white. "Oh, Joe," begged Potter, "I've never used a weapon in my life. I never meant to. Please tell me how it was, my friend. The doctor was so young and promising." "Oh, Potter, first the doctor hit you with a heavy board and you fell down. Then you came up and put the knife into his heart. Don't you remember, Potter?" "I didn't know what I was doing. Please do not say anything to anyone. Do you promise?" "Don't worry, Potter," replied Red Joe. "I'll keep this secret." Then they parted and went different ways. But Potter forgot the knife on the grass. Tom and Huck arrived to the village, but they were still trembling with fear. "Huck, we must not say anything about this to anyone," said Tom. "If Red Joe knew we saw his murder, he would kill us." "You're right, Tom," replied Huck. "Let Muff Potter tell. We won't say anything, but we must promise not to talk, writing it on a piece of wood and signing it in blood." So they promised on a piece of wood, and each boy signed this with some blood from his thumb. They heard a dog's sad cry, and they thought that was a bad sign. "Someone's in danger," said Tom. He was scared to death. Then they heard someone sleeping near them. They saw a man on the ground. They soon noticed that he was Muff Potter. "He'll soon be dead," they both said, and they separated. Tom ran home. No one said a word to Tom. Their eyes were turned away from him. There was a terrible silence at the breakfast table. His aunt was angry with him. Finally, his aunt wept over him and asked him how he could go and break her old heart. She told him to do whatever he wanted, and she wouldn't be interested. Not only his aunt was angry with him, but also Mr. Dobbins was very angry. Tom was also afraid of Red Joe. "This is too much. Everything is wrong in my life," he said to himself. Chapter 6. Tom talks in his sleep. On the next day, people were talking about the dead doctor and the knife that had been found on the grass near the doctor's body. They knew that the knife belonged to Muff Potter, so he was in trouble. Someone had seen Potter washing himself in a stream. This was strange because they knew that Potter washed himself rarely. So the crowd thought that he would have been washing blood off his hands, and they didn't know where he was. The people of the village wanted to go to the graveyard and see that horrible place. Someone from the crowd said, "Muff Potter will die for it." The other man said, "Poor fellow, this must be a lesson to grave robbers." Then they saw Muff Potter coming with the sheriff. He was standing next to the dead doctor. He was afraid and trembling. Potter wanted to say some words to the public. "Friends, I didn't do it." There was a voice coming from the crowd and saying, "Did anyone accuse you?" This was Red Joe's voice. "Please, Joe, tell them the truth," begged Potter. So Red Joe told them his unreal story, and at last everybody believed him. Tom was watching Joe telling lies to everyone. The little boy was astonished because Red Joe was a calm liar. "Why didn't you leave the town? Why did you want to come here?" somebody said to Potter. "I couldn't help it," Potter answered. "I wanted to run away, but I couldn't leave my home and my village." Finally, the sheriff asked, "Is this your knife, Potter?" He couldn't deny it, as it was his own knife, so Potter went to prison. That night, Sid heard Tom talking in his dream. In the morning, at breakfast, Sid told his auntie that Tom had said strange words like blood in his dream, and there was something that he wanted to say. "Say what, Tom?" Sid asked. Tom was silent. He couldn't give an answer. Aunt Polly thought that those bad dreams were related to the murder in the graveyard, so she didn't say anything. She didn't shout at him and didn't get angry with him. Tom pretended that he had a toothache and he wore a cloth round his face. This was a clever plan for him, so that he wouldn't talk in his sleep. But Sid listened to him in the night, moving the cloth away. Then he put it back again. Tom was really sorry for Potter. He wanted to do something good for him, but he was a child and he knew that Red Joe was a dangerous man. So this made him see more nightmares. But he didn't know his brother moved the cloth away at nights. Tom was so sad that the other day that he disappeared with one of his friends. Tom and Joe Harper made their plans. They agreed to be pirates and play a pirate game. Joe's mother had whipped him, but he was not angry with her anymore. He only wanted to have fun with Tom. There was an island near them in the Mississippi River. It was called Jackson's Island. No one was living there, but there were all tones of green. So they decided to meet there and to invite Huckleberry too. Tom went to find Huck, and after stealing some food, they met by the river. They were so hungry that they finished the food only in a few seconds. Then they saw a raft and decided to steal it too. When they reached Jackson's Island on the raft, it was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. They all seemed very happy. "We don't have to get up early and go to school. There's no one to tell us what to do," said Tom. "We're pirates, and pirates don't do such things," Huck said. "Do you have an idea about what they do?" "They find money in some ships. Sometimes they take ships and burn them," Tom cried. Soon they all felt tired, and they began to think that leaving home and stealing were wrong. They agreed not to steal anything else, then they fell asleep. They didn't turn back home for a few days. One morning they saw that their raft had been disappeared. They were passing the whole day hunting fish and cooking them, swimming by the river and playing games. That night, Tom waited until Huck and Joe fell asleep. He walked to the river and swam across it. Finally, he reached his auntie's house. He saw Sid, Aunt Polly, and Joe Harper's mother in the house. Aunt Polly and Mrs. Harper were crying. "My Joe was a good boy," said Mrs. Harper. "Sometimes he stole things, but I always punished him. I always whipped him. I'm so sorry." Tom was not a bad boy. I often shouted at him and punished him, although he had a good heart, said Aunt Polly, crying with pain. Suddenly, Sid said, "He was not a good boy." "Don't say bad things about my dear Tom," shouted Aunt Polly. Although Tom was under the bed, he couldn't say a word. He understood that everyone had believed they had drowned. All the townspeople were searching for their bodies everywhere. When Mrs. Harper returned to her house, Aunt Polly went to bed. Tom secretly kissed her and returned to camp. He told everything to the other boys, and they returned to town. When Aunt Polly saw Tom at home, she was astonished. This time she began to cry with happiness. "Tom, I thought that you were dead. Why didn't you come back to tell me everything?" asked Aunt Polly. "Oh, Auntie, I dreamt of you last night, sitting here crying," replied Tom. "Oh, that night we sat like that," said Aunt Polly. "And I dreamt that Joe's mother was here near you. She was really here, and what then? Sid said bad things about me." "No, I didn't say anything," replied Sid. "You said exactly those bad words, Sid. Don't deny it," cried Aunt Polly. "It was only a dream," said Sid, but he thought that it was really a long one. It was also strange that everything in that dream was real. Aunt Polly was quite kind to Tom, more than she had ever been before. When he was out, he met Becky. She said she had to go on a holiday with her parents. Those were boring days for Tom, but he never had any problems in finding trouble. He and Huck had a secret about the murder, and this seemed to bring trouble to both of them. Chapter 7. The Trial of Muff Potter. The next morning, the village courthouse was completely filled. After the judge arrived, they started to call witnesses who could talk about Muff Potter's strange behavior the day after the murder. Potter had been in prison for a long time. Tom could not forget the terrible secret. He wanted to tell everything, but he was afraid of Red Joe. Huck and Joe were at the courthouse that morning, and they began to talk about Muff Potter. "Have you said anything about the murder, Huck?" he asked. "Don't be silly, of course not," Huck replied. "Why do you ask?" "Because I'm afraid," Tom said. "If we speak about the murder, Red Joe will find us and kill us. We'll be safe if we say nothing." "But you know that he's innocent. They believe that he did it. Don't you ever feel sorry for him?" Tom asked. "Always. He just catches fish and sells them to get some money. Once he had given me a half fish." "He has never hurt anyone in his life," Huck replied. When Muff Potter came in, his face was white and he seemed hopeless. Red Joe was also there waiting for the trial. The witnesses talked one by one, and all of them spoke against Muff Potter. But suddenly a voice cried, "Thomas Sawyer!" Everyone was surprised to hear his name. Tom was nervous and scared, but he went to the witness stand. "Where were you the night of June the 17th?" the judge asked. Tom saw Red Joe's face and could not speak for a while, but then he gained courage and began to tell what had happened. "I was in the graveyard, sir," he said quietly. "Were you near Horse William's grave?" "Yes, sir." "Were you hiding?" the judge said. "I was hiding," Tom said. "Where were you hiding?" "Behind the tree, sir." "Now tell us what you saw in the graveyard." Tom told almost the whole story, and he reached the end of it. "The doctor hit Potter with the board, Potter fell down, and Red Joe jumped with the knife and pushed it," said Tom. But the sentence was unfinished. Red Joe did not wait to hear the end of the sentence. He jumped out of an open window and ran away. The good citizens of St. Petersburg embraced Muff Potter, and Tom was once again the town hero. But he was still anxious because Red Joe had run away, and he thought that his life was in danger. Muff Potter thanked Tom for his help, but although the days had passed, there was no information about Red Joe. He did not come back, but as the days passed by, Tom's anxiety faded away. He was happy again. Chapter 8. The Treasure Hunters. One of Tom's dreams was finding a treasure. He was on holiday now, and he didn't want to stay at home. He wanted to be a treasure hunter with his best friend Huckleberry Finn. So one day, he told Huck about his plans. Huck agreed on digging for treasures. But where would they dig? "Where are we going to look for it?" Huck asked. "I'm not quite sure, but I know that pirates always hide their treasure on islands. Some men hide it in the ground, or in the middle of the night they hide it under a tree. But some people hide their gold in old and haunted houses," Tom replied. "And then, don't these pirates and thieves come back?" "They think they'll come back for it, but they die or go to prison. They can't come back, and the treasure stays there, waits for the others to find it. So we have to start with the old house over there," Tom said. Huck was afraid of the spirits, and he didn't want to enter that old house at first. But at last he agreed on the plan. The garden of the haunted house was full of long grass. Part of the roof had fallen in. The fences round the garden were also falling down. There was no glass on the windows. They didn't enter the house that day. They decided on coming there again the next day. The next day, they carried their tools to the haunted house and entered whispering one another. "Don't move," Tom whispered. They had left their tools in a corner and gone up the stairs. But then they heard two men entering. They immediately recognized one of the men. He was an old Spaniard. Nobody knew his name. He had long white hair and wore green glasses. When they found out who the other man was, the boys were astonished. He was Red Joe. The boys became silent. It was not safe anymore. "Let's dig the money somewhere in this house," Red Joe said. "We can't carry the dollars everywhere." Tom and Huck were trembling with fear, but they were also making signs, and their eyes were bright. "Money!" But they did not say anything. They only watched. While Joe was digging, his knife struck something in the ground. "What is it?" the Spaniard asked. "It's a box. Come and help me," Red Joe cried. They had found an iron box filled with gold coins. The men examined the treasure with big and bright eyes. It was also exciting to the boys. "Muriel's men used to come here sometimes. It must be their treasure, but now it's ours," said Red Joe's companion. "We must bury this again, but we must take it to my place, to number 2, under the cross." The boys were very glad to hear that they would bury the treasure again. But soon Red Joe said to his companion, "I'll go and look upstairs. Somebody could be there." The boys' hearts were beating fast and their eyes were full of fear. Then suddenly the step broke under Red Joe's foot and he fell down the stairs. His companion was angry with him, and finally they went out of the building. The boys also left the haunted house after a little while. The adventure of that day tormented Tom in his dreams. The next day he found Huck, and the two boys vowed to find Red Joe's secret hiding place, number 2. "We must follow Red Joe and find that money," Tom said. "I can't understand the meaning of number 2 and under the cross. Can you understand, Tom?" "Perhaps it's a number of a house or of a room. But there are only 2 inns in the town that hire rooms," Tom replied. "Let's go and look at both of them," Huck said. In the first inn, the room number 2 was occupied for a long time, but the boys found out that in the second inn there was a strange room. The boy at the inn told the boys that it was a haunted room. No one ever seemed to go into it and to come out of it, except at night. The following night Tom entered the room with the help of a key, and he saw Red Joe lying on the floor. Later he told Huck that he had also seen a cup and a lot of bottles. Tom's eyes were full of fear, and then they both decided to enter the room and get the iron box when the room was empty. Chapter 9. Lost in the Dark Cave. On Friday morning, Tom felt happy with the news that Judge Thatcher's family had come back to town the night before. On the following day, he and Becky played games together, and Tom almost forgot Red Joe and the treasure. But Huck didn't forget the treasure, and he kept on waiting in front of the inn. One night, he saw 2 men carrying the box, but he had no time to tell Tom, so he decided to follow them alone. The man carried the treasure into a cave. When Huck saw them near that cave, he decided to go back and inform Tom about what he had seen. But Tom and Becky had gone for a picnic near that cave, and they didn't come back that night. So Huck couldn't find Tom in town, and he saw that both Tom's and Becky's parents were crying with fear. They didn't know where they had gone. Tom and Becky played hide-and-seek games with the other children, but then they separated from the crowd. They walked a long way through the cave together, carrying candles. They wrote their names on the rocks in smoke. They made marks with smoke in some places. They thought that these marks would help them find the way back. But after a while they could no longer hear the voices of the other picnickers. Soon they reached the part of the cave which was full of bats. One of them flew at Becky's light and put it out. They were both afraid. But suddenly Tom saw a passage and they walked through it. When he saw a hand carrying a candle, he was astonished, because it was Red Joe. Tom did not make any noise. Then Red Joe passed through the passage and he didn't see them. Both Tom and Becky were hungry and exhausted. They had also lost their way inside the big and endless cave. "Tom, when we have to die, let's die together," said Becky. Tom kissed her and told her that their parents would find them soon. In the middle of the night, the bells awoke the people. "They found them!" the people shouted, and this pleased everyone in town. They went to the carriage to see and to kiss them. The children had escaped through the hole and had reached the town with the help of 2 men. 2 days later, Judge Thatcher told Tom that they had put an iron door across the mouth of the cave. Tom said with panic, "But Red Joe must be inside the cave, sir." "What? We must get him out. Hurry!" the judge cried. When they reached the cave and opened the iron door, they saw the dead body of Red Joe. Tom didn't feel sorry for him. That day, Huck told Tom that he had followed the 2 men and had seen them entering the cave with the treasure in their hands. So they decided that they had to go there one more time. Chapter 10. They become rich and famous. The 2 boys went through the river in a boat, and they reached the cave at last. It was 5 miles from the mouth of the cave, and Tom realized that they were very near that place. He held the candle up and showed the cross on the rock. "Look at the rock, Huck," Tom said. "Do you remember those words of Red Joe? Under the cross, Huck! The treasure must be here!" So they decided to dig the floor, and after digging the floor, they found the box under the cross. Huck took some of the old golden coins, and he shouted with happiness, "We're rich, Tom!" They put the coins in bags, and they carried them to town. A few days later, Tom told the whole story to Judge Thatcher and to the rest of the town. Tom and Huck were admired everywhere. Even the village newspaper published biographies about the boys. But the old coins brought some problems to the boys. They did not understand the world of money and how to work with banks. So Judge Thatcher helped them to make their money work and make it bring more money. Tom was glad to be rich, but Huck was not. He had to wear new, ironed, and clean dresses. He had to comb his hair, wake up at the same time every day, and also go to the parties, but he hated them. He was getting sad for himself when he remembered his old and happier life. So only 3 weeks he could bear to live with Mrs. Douglas. Then he left that good lady. Mrs. Douglas was a widow. She had treated Huck like a mother and wanted to raise him. Huck had spent a couple of weeks in her house. Tom found Huck in an old and deserted house. "Go home, Tom," Huck said. "You're a rich boy and you mustn't live here with me. I can't bear those clean clothes. I can't breathe in them. I feel like I'm poisoned. I like to live like in the old days." "So you want to be a rough boy again," Tom replied. "But if you do that, you can't join us. I'm forming a new band of men. We'll be better than the pirates. We'll attack and steal money from people. But I can't have a rough member in my team. If I take you to my band, people will say that Tom Sawyer's men are a rough crowd. So make a decision. You can go back to live with Mrs. Douglas and be in my band, or you can stay out of our band." Tom thought that there could be no low characters among the respectable robbers. These words made Huck really sad, but after a long silence he said, "I accept to go back for a month, then I'll decide. But please let me join your band." "That's good," Tom said. "Of course you'll join." "Sometimes I'll go out of that house and come here," Huck said to himself. "We can be better than the pirates with the other boys in the band. This will make me happy."